The Reading Rockets teleconference series is a production of WETA in cooperation with the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. Funding for this teleconference is provided by the United States Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs.
Hello, I'm Delia Fompa. Welcome to this year's first Reading Rockets teleconference. Today we're going to talk about a perennial challenge for reading teachers, teaching to the many different levels of young readers in each classroom. We've gathered three of the nation's leading experts in the field to help us. Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson is Professor of Educational Leadership, Foundations, and Policy at the University of Virginia. Dr. Louise Spear-Swerling is Professor of Special Education and Reading and Area Coordinator of the Graduate Program in Learning Disabilities at Southern Connecticut State University. And Dr. Michael Pressley is University Distinguished Professor of Education at Michigan State University. We are also joined by an audience of teachers, administrators, special education professionals, and parents from across the country, and in Quebec. Later in the program, we will be taking questions from our studio audience. Let's begin with Dr. Tomlinson. Here's the question of the day. How can one teacher address the individual needs of every child in her class so that they all become strong, confident readers?
Well, I think an honest answer probably is that no teacher can be all things to all students all the time. But I think the real truth of teaching is that if our goal is to understand the particular needs of students, and we stay in pursuit of that, and we try to address those needs as we can come to understand them, we're likely to do a lot better job for more students than if we assume they're all basically alike.
Well, set the scene for us. What does an ideal differentiated classroom look like?
Well, I think an ideal differentiated classroom is simply a flexible one, and I don't think there's really a particular recipe for a differentiated classroom. But what you're really hoping for is a teacher who establishes flexible routines well enough so that when the teacher is aware of particular students' needs, there will be at least some times in the classroom where different students are doing different things to address those needs. So maybe at some point a teacher would be meeting with one small group of students who have a particular need that she's able to address more appropriately within that small group. At the same time, you might have some students working at learning centers with particular skills that assessments indicate they need, and the centers can be tailored to those particular needs. Might have some students working with one another to discuss books or to share reading on a topic that they find interesting together. And you might still have some other students working at a table or a desk on reading or writing things that are particular to their needs. There will always be times when the teacher needs to meet with the whole class and keep them a community of learners. But the trick really is to establish routines where at least some of the time multiple things can happen so that students are working in areas that are closer to their particular needs.
We have so many teachers out there who want to do this. What are the first steps a reading teacher can take to set up a differentiated classroom?
Well, I really think there probably are three big elements to a good differentiated classroom. One of those is being very aware of what the components of successful reading are. And I think that takes time for us as teachers. It's a complex endeavor, and to understand those facets, the different elements, and the particular skills within those is important. And I think that's a lifelong pursuit for teachers. I think a second thing is to become more and more skilled at being aware of student needs, really watching kids as individuals and trying to attend to them both formally and informally to get a sense of what's working for a student in relation to those goals and what's not working for a particular student. And then I think the third big piece is to figure out how to be more and more flexible as a classroom teacher. How can I use space more flexibly than I have been? What can I do to be more flexible with time use than maybe I have been? What about resources? Is there a way to get more resources or to use the resources that I have more flexibly? And I think an important thing in starting for teachers is to realize that differentiation is not apart from good teaching, it's a part of good teaching. And so by doing those just sort of standard good teaching things, you can become better and better. But I think an important piece of advice for teachers is to begin with something that seems manageable. I think often as teachers we feel so compelled to do everything perfectly for students that we want to get it all right tomorrow. We want it to be all perfect next week. And then that becomes overwhelming. And so we decide it's not within our reach and we give it up. A teacher might decide simply to do one vocabulary routine differently for different students, or might begin with whole class reading and then just different work that the students do with it. I think you constantly have to refresh yourself on the components of reading to which you're aiming and continually refine your assessment skills and your awareness of students. But I think when it comes to the routines, beginning in a way that seems small and safe and effective to that teacher is a great starting place.
It's a very thoughtful process of practice, lots of practice.
Absolutely.
What is the role of assessment in a differentiated classroom?
Well, assessment is actually, of course, the root system of differentiation. I think sometimes it's easy to think that differentiation is some sort of tea leaf reading. I look at her and she looks like she would do better with this. But assessment really is our measure of where a particular student is in regard to particular goals. And if we're clear about the goals and we understand where students are in proximity to those goals, we just sort of have a logical response of what we do next. And so continually monitoring students. I think pre-assessment is important before we begin a new segment or a unit of study to see what our spread of learners is. But continually as we teach, it's really important to see that every piece of work a student does really can inform our thinking and our planning as teachers. And so if we use what students do to help us have insights about who's progressing, who's moving further ahead, who's behind in an area, that's really what helps us make our instructional decisions. I think it's probably important to remember that while there's an important emphasis on standardized testing in schools, and that can give us kind of a big sense of a class, it's really that daily assessment or frequent assessment throughout a sequence of study that's very close to our instructional decision making tomorrow and can really help us understand how to modify the plans that we basically made to benefit various students.
So regular assessment is very
Absolutely.
important. Let me go to Dr. Pressley. I'd like to ask you, let's take a step back. Why are so many students coming to us at so many different levels? And can't we just expect them to catch up on their own?
Human variation is natural. There isn't any collection of people that don't differ in multiple ways. And one of the absolute realities of kindergarten or first grade is the individual differences will be huge. And here's the really tricky part. Not only will they be huge on day one, the rate of change for these children will be very, very different. Here's another tricky part. What you do for each one of those individual kids can matter very much. So the particular type of instruction can result in either rapid change or not so rapid change. So my friend Fred Morrison at Michigan has just done some wonderful work showing that for kids entering grade 1, low skills, a very explicit skill-oriented curriculum is the best way to give them a big growth year in first grade. For the kids entering high, you're much better off having a much more holistic curriculum where they're, if they can enter reading easy chapter books, have them reading more chapter books. Kids are different. Okay, with respect to the assessment piece, I've spent a great deal of my time studying very effective teachers. And one of the things they do every day, every hour, and the best of them actually every minute of every hour, is size up how the kids are responding to the task and the instruction they've been given. And oftentimes there's 5 or 6 different tasks or instruction going on because the most effective teachers do differentiate their instruction. But they're always there monitoring. They're always on their feet. They're looking over the shoulder. They're listening to the kids when they partner read. They're watching when the kids write. They get in there and they intervene and give them mini lessons, okay? They know their kids really well because they spend more of their time oriented to their kids during the school day than anything else. They also know their curriculum well, and they know curriculum options well because they've spent years building that competence, okay? There is no 1 week professional development that develops a good first grade, second grade, or third grade teacher. What develops a person who knows many, many curriculum options is long-term immersion in developing the skills and taking advantage of every skills opportunity. What develops the competence to match the curricular options to the particular children is doing it a lot and doing it over years, and from the moment those kids land in your classroom, orient it like crazy.
Well, I saw lots of nods taking place while you were talking, so we must have a lot of agreement on that. Dr. Spear-Swerling, are there any negatives to differentiated instruction? Is it controversial?
I don't think there are negatives to it if it's done well. I think it's very challenging to do it well, and I think teachers need good preparation and also opportunities for ongoing professional development. You know, one of the things that we're realizing more and more is that teacher preparation is not, you can't give somebody 4 or even 5 years of pre-service preparation and prepare them to a level for a whole career. It really takes, pre-service preparation is very important, but opportunities for ongoing professional development are also extremely important.
What else does a teacher have to do it well?
Well, I think certainly teachers need adequate resources. As Mike mentioned and Carol mentioned, you know, there's a big range that kids that teachers will have in their classrooms. That's true even in kindergarten, and the spread only gets larger as you go on in school because the kids will progress at different rates. So it's vital, for example, that children have access to a range of books. Teachers need to have a range of materials to teach with. They need adequate support in terms of specialists and human resources to help them, and also adequate time in the school day for doing this well.
There are a lot of support systems a teacher needs. Is there anything in particular administrators can do to support teachers in differentiating classroom instruction?
I think administrators can provide very important leadership. So they can make reading a priority. They can make sure that there is adequate time allotted. They can have different, they can play a role in providing adequate resources, making sure that there are different kinds of curricular options available, and making sure that teachers have good professional development in this area.
Thank you. That was a lot from all of you to start with. We visited a school in Portland, Oregon that works very hard to teach every child to read. Let's take a look at how Metzger elementary teachers support each of their kids.
Meet Ms. Darby. She's a kindergarten teacher here at Metzger Elementary.
So we have G-O-Z.
Kindergarten is a critical time for developing early reading skills, sometimes by using nonsense words.
If you change the last letter, how could you turn it into a real word?
A T, got.
One of the hard parts about teaching kindergarten is that kids come in at all different levels. Metzger handles that by assessing each student on a regular basis.
The name of this letter is Q. Say the name with me. Ready? Q. What is the name of this letter?
Some kids
Ready?
are already at risk. Kids who don't know their letters, have trouble with rhyming, or who may speak a language other than English. They get an extra dose of small group instruction every day.
Everyone find the letter X.
The instruction is very explicit. Ms. Retzlaff helps the kids break the 26-letter code of our alphabet by being very clear with them about what each letter looks and sounds like.
And I'm going to go left around the queen and way down her staff. Now you guys are going to trace the letter Q.
So when you're trying to figure out if a school is doing a good job, here are 2 questions to start with. 1, do they assess all students regularly? And 2, is the instruction explicit? In 1st grade, Metzger continues to teach the 5 elements of good reading instruction. They teach phonemic awareness, helping children understand that the language we speak is made up of individual sounds.
Lock.
They teach phonics, the concept that letters represent sounds.
Say it fast. Chirped.
They teach fluency, how to read smoothly and with expression. They teach vocabulary And they teach comprehension, the ability to understand and interpret what you read.
Brooke, what else do you know about Martin Luther King Jr.?
He was a minister.
These are all skills that parents, with practice, can reinforce at home.
What's this word?
So.
At Metzger, the first job is to divide the kids into flexible groups based on their reading level. That way, they're challenged and also achieve some success every day. Mrs. Pulver's students are working to catch up with their first grade peers.
Marisa, what does fond mean?
It means you really like something a lot.
For kids who struggle even in Ms. Pulver's group, teacher assistant Marilyn Peterson uses a much more basic curriculum with more opportunities to practice basic skills.
Kite, hope, hop.
Start all over.
Kite, hop, hope, kit.
Perfect. All right.
For kids who are behind, like J.T. Richardson, Metzger throws in an extra dose of reading with one-on-one tutoring, while the rest of the class works on science or social studies. J.T. gets to review the lesson for the day. This book is at a good level for J.T., so the more he practices, the more comfortable he gets. Being able to read fluidly and automatically is critical to comprehension.
Ready, set, go.
Dina said, let's bake cupcakes. Jack said, I hate to bake. Have you ever baked cupcakes? Jack asked Fran. And Granddad, can you help us?
Wow. Oh my gosh, and you got in the word bake right at the time. Wow. 15 more words. High five. High five. On the side. Down low. Way to go. JT.
JT charts his progress every day. But while they continue to give him positive feedback, his teachers are concerned.
Things are going. He's a concern because there's a marginal growth, but it's just totally not consistent. Okay.
Every 3 months, Metzger's school district comes in to do its own assessment of each child. That's in addition to the weekly or bi-weekly assessments that the school does.
Built.
JT is a student that I would be concerned about. It's the end of first grade. He still needs to sound all of his words out. He has a few words memorized, the basic sight words, but he still has a ways to go there.
We are finished. Thank you very much.
Dr. Roland Good of the University of Oregon worked to develop the assessment that Metzger uses.
His progress is telling us that we have not yet found the level of support that he needs. And the child is always right. So if the child is telling you, I'm not getting enough support, they're right. And then we need to find a way to provide more support to him.
At Metzger, they use flexible grouping, small groups, a variety of research-based teaching methods, a variety of interventions for struggling readers, and regular, ongoing assessment.
Dr. Pressley, in Oregon we see one way of differentiating reading instruction, and that's flexible grouping across classrooms. What are the pros and cons of that approach?
Well, I think that it's one arrow you have in your quiver, and it's one teachers use a lot. With respect to the most challenging students, however, a few years ago I wrote a book on the 581 challenges of beginning teaching. And as part of that, we had a contrast. Are there any of these challenges that endure? There is one that endures throughout your career as a teacher, and it's figuring out what to do with the most difficult students, the ones who are making the least gain. Every one of them requires unique problem solving and reflection. Okay, so the flexible grouping is a start. Now, one of the things that was very important in that tape was talking about additional instruction. And they talked about one dose of additional instruction. In some of the effective schools I work in, the most at-risk kids are getting 3 or 4 additional half-hour segments of one-to-one or very small group support. And then they're looking around for some after-school stuff as well. For the most challenged students, just the flexible grouping will not be enough. With respect to the assessment issue, there was also kind of a one-size-fits-all type of assessment implied in there. And without a doubt, what you see in the very best, most effective schools and classrooms is they're using lots and lots of assessments. They're using the standardized tests. Sometimes they use something like a Dibble system, but much more important is the teacher monitoring. Is the kid responding to this instruction? Are they showing growth? And a centerpiece of new thinking about how you differentiate instruction is to try different, if the kid isn't getting it in the current setup, try something else and monitor, is there now growth going on, and go with what works for that youngster.
Now, there's no question that teaching reading is hard, but what characteristics do you see in teachers that can make this work, differentiated instruction in classrooms?
The teachers who make it work come in with a headset. This kid can learn, and I'm going to figure out how to do it. Okay? I have a variety of materials. I'm going to figure out which ones mesh with that youngster. I have a variety of instructional strategies. I'm going to figure out which ones work with that kid. I'm going to figure out which of my kids most need the additional instructional resources, whether it's a foster grandmother, college tutors, or a very skilled reading specialist, or in the best of all possible worlds, all of them. They are continuously thinking about that kid, what do they need, and flexibly problem solving. And the very best ones are good at doing this, not only for the weakest kids in the class, but for the strongest kids as well.
Give us a short answer to this question, because I think it's important to get it in here. What about schools that have adopted a single reading program? How do you differentiate instruction? Give me a short answer there.
An excellent, you should not adopt a program that does not offer many, many routes to differentiation. The very best, most well thought out, heavily researched, and historically important published programs have that in them. The ones that were cooked in 18 months by a major publisher to try to compete with those best of the bunch are not what you should be buying.
Dr. Spear-Swerling, in listening to this, we've all thought about whether schools are doing it right. In what situations is it beneficial to pull a child out of class for individualized instruction?
Well, I think it's more helpful to focus on how you meet a child's needs. So sometimes pull-out remediation can be appropriate. In my experience, it's more often related to, the issue of that is more often related to how much of an outlier a child is. So if a youngster is really far behind other children, then often they need something that is different than what is provided as part of standard classroom instruction. And whether you pull the child out for remediation or whether a specialist comes into the classroom and works with them in the classroom, they're still going to be needing something different. As an example of that, consider, say, a third grader who's essentially a non-reader and may need very systematic, basic level phonics instruction that is not needed, or at least not needed to the same degree by many other third graders. So that child, and you see that even more at the upper grades, that happens even more as children advance in school. Then to meet that child's needs, there has to be instruction provided, whether it's in the classroom or out of the classroom, that meets that need.
Carol, what's your take on pulling out kids for individualized instruction?
Well, I think I agree with what Louise is saying. In general, I kind of go with the medical model, do the least invasive thing first. And I think sometimes we pull a child out of a classroom during a time when there's something that would be really rich and beneficial to them to take them someplace else, when we can provide it meaningfully in the regular classroom and keep that student a part of the community of learners. And then I think that's a positive. If we can't do that, then I agree with Louise. The question is usually not for any student, where do we put their bodies? It's what do they need, and what are the multiple ways we could provide that, and given what our options are, what would be best for that child.
Mike, in your research, when has pull-out worked, and when doesn't it work?
Pull-out often works with the kids who are at most at risk. You pull them out, especially if you have an excellent reading specialist, and give them a half hour of instruction a day, and that can really help a great deal. But what's really interesting in those places is what's going on in the regular classroom. Often when those kids are pulled out, is there's very individualized instruction going on rather than whole group instruction that they're missing. The whole group stuff, these teachers are very good at managing their time. So if there's some important social studies or science lesson, they make sure everybody's there for it. Or if it's something the kid, is just going to die if they're not there, some art activity or drama or something. These people who are really effective teachers manage the kids in every way they can be managed well. But no doubt about it, for the highest at-risk kids, tutoring does work. The more skilled the tutoring, the better, although even college student volunteers can make some impact.
So lots of individual decisions. Along that vein, Dr. Tomlinson, how do we create accelerated learning opportunities for our higher performing students?
Well, I think we really need to realize that what Mike said about having just a mindset, that our students vary, and it's our job to know where they are and what their next step is, applies to high-end learners as well as it does to other students. And it's really important for those kids that we give them opportunities to read things that they can read. We're so compelled as teachers to want to make sure we've taught every student reading that we spend a lot of time teaching kids to read who already know very, very well how to read. I think it's important, again, to monitor those students, again, against the competencies that we feel are important. But I think once a teacher has evidence that a student is competent in an area, there's really no point, and in fact, there's a detriment to continuing just to teach it. And so you may find a high-end reader who, for example, needs some work with syllables, but really, for the most part, can read on their own. I think letting those students read books that are appropriately challenging for them, giving them opportunities to work with like peers who read at that level and can discuss things with them, and giving them opportunities to read books about things they really care about is extremely important for them. In a lot of ways, what it is the teacher taking the lead from the student, and again, sort of saying that student is giving us the clues that she's ready to move ahead. This is something that we could do that lets her grow as well.
How do you work with your students, Louise, in terms of working with higher performing students?
Well, certainly I agree with the things that Carol has said, making sure that students who are high achieving have adequate opportunities to read books at their level, that they're not continuing to practice things they already know how to do. With my students, I do quite a bit of work in the urban schools, and one of the things that I sometimes see in the district where we work is that, of course, everybody tends to be very focused on low achievement and helping low achieving kids, but in fact, there are kids who are also very high achievers, and if we don't give those children opportunities to read challenging books to move ahead, then we lose them as they advance in school.
Good thought, thank you. Now we'll visit Arlington, Virginia, where we'll take a look at Arlington Public Schools Intake Center. Kids at different levels are challenging enough for most teachers, but what happens when kids speak a different language?
8-year-old Marlon Escobar Lopez has an important appointment today. He's checking into his new school system in Arlington, Virginia.
Marlon Escobar.
He's at the Arlington Intake Center, where staff will figure out exactly what he needs from his new teachers.
Intake Center is the place where children who speak another language or have another language background enter school.
The Intake Center stays very busy. Arlington's English language learners speak 104 languages and come from 122 different countries. Most of the children speak Spanish, but those kids are very diverse too, both culturally and economically.
Children from the middle class have had certain experiences that other students may not have had. They've been to museums, they have been read to in their own language.
Marlon is from Honduras. He looks like he's ready for school, but will the school be ready for him? The process starts with his dad.
Parents are just that part of the learning equation that we cannot do without. It's the child, the parent, the teacher. They're the three most basic components.
The interview gives Arlington some important information about Marlon, like the fact that he's been to school in the United States for a year already.
We look not only at the academic background, but we also look at the whole child. We look at his health situation. We look at family history.
When his dad's finished with his questions, it's Marlon's turn. His teachers need to know how well Marlon can understand spoken and written English.
And put the girl behind the man.
So if you're assessing a child, you not only want to assess their knowledge of letters and sounds and so forth in English, but you want to tap into it in Spanish too.
Gatitos, los gatos son animales.
Because whatever they know in Spanish, you can be quite certain you can use to help them acquire the skills in English.
Put strawberries and carrots.
Marlon can read a little bit in English already, and his comprehension skills in both languages are strong. So the Intake Center places him in a second grade class for English language learners.
Short sound of I, everybody. Okay.
His teachers at Abingdon Elementary have received all the information gathered at the Intake Center, both social and academic, so they know exactly where to start with Marlon.
Using time for instruction right away at the correct and appropriate level is important to us. We want all our students to achieve at a high level, to be challenged, regardless of where they started.
Indigo.
Indigo, excellent.
Dr. Spear-Swerling, what should teachers keep in mind when differentiating instruction for English language learners?
I think it's important to know about the child's language and literacy abilities in the native language as well as in English. As the tape indicated, children who have knowledge in their native language can often transfer that to English, especially if the native language is an alphabetic language like English, which is true in the case of Spanish. So instruction can build on those strengths that children have. Also, developing children's spoken English ability is very important because that's going to be a foundation for them to learn to read in English.
Carol, what do you think? I know where you work, that's become a growing challenge for our schools.
Well, I think in addition to what Louise just said, we think in terms of students' readiness levels, and these students have a huge need to develop vocabulary efficiently and quickly, and particularly to develop the academic vocabulary that they need to help them learn math and science. They may need different degrees of instruction in phonics and that kind of thing. I think in addition to looking at the readiness needs, it's important also to look at students' interests. If you have students from other languages who have a particular interest in a topic or thinking back on their own experiences in another country, there's a lot you can do to motivate students by letting them develop personalized vocabulary banks around words that they care about, topics that they care about. And I think also to remember that students vary not just in their readiness or in their interest, but in how they learn. And some students will learn much better in conversation with other students, some in one-on-one tutoring, some by hearing, some by drawing what they do. And again, it kind of goes back to what Mike was saying of trying to have a large instructional repertoire, trying enough things with students to see what's really clicking for them, and then being able to steer them certainly in their readiness needs, but also capitalizing on that by tapping into interest and by trying to capture their best ways of learning.
Louise, another major challenge has to be kids with learning disabilities. How do teachers handle special ed students by teaching them reading in the mainstream classroom?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the special education umbrella covers a wide range of students. So although children with learning disabilities are the most commonly identified, there are children with other disability conditions as well. For children with learning disabilities, difficulty learning phonics kinds of skills and word decoding is often a core problem, and that's something that does need to be addressed. Those students often benefit from very systematic, explicit instruction in that area. If that instruction is part of the curriculum, that will be helpful to those students, although some of them, as Mike indicated earlier, will need more than that. The most challenging students will need more than that. They may need some sort of pull-out remediation or help from a specialist. Other disability conditions, such as intellectual disabilities, for example, will involve other needs. Kids with intellectual disabilities usually have broad language and vocabulary delays, so that would need to be addressed. Sometimes children who are on the autism spectrum, especially high-functioning youngsters, do well often in decoding, but will have comprehension difficulties, especially related to more inferential kinds of comprehension.
That's a lot of challenges, but some good solutions. Mike, do you have something to add to the special education issue?
Yes, and it ties back as well to the second language kids. There is a great deal of converging evidence. If you want the best possible outcomes you can get with at-risk kids and with second language kids who are mostly going to be educated in regular education classrooms in this country and all over North America, including in Quebec, a strong balancing of the skills instruction and holistic reading and writing opportunities is just absolutely essential. That's how you get the best outcomes for the weakest kids. And that's very difficult and challenging to do. It's challenging from the point of view of training teachers who can deliver all of those components. It's challenging from the point of view of identifying materials that can serve all those components. But there's one more thing that is right in the center of every effective classroom and every effective school we've seen. They're over-the-top motivating. These schools have developed a culture of very, very positive education for children, and the direction that they're focusing on hardest are the most at-risk kids. You go in these schools and you cannot miss. It works. These kids like being there.
That's a great point. And Louise, I'd like to segue from Mike to you around that question. How do you keep students motivated when instruction is so varied?
Well, there's certainly a variety of ways to motivate kids. Having choice, for students to have choice of books or topics or reading materials is one very important way to motivate them. Having students share interests. Often, a child will be interested in a recommendation from another child that they wouldn't listen as closely to what the teacher had to say about that. So those kinds of things are very important. For kids who are struggling and reading at low levels, listening comprehension and oral discussion are very important because often those children can function at much higher levels in terms of oral language, and you can do much more, motivating things, more interesting books and materials orally than you can sometimes in reading.
What have you focused on motivating students with your own students in college?
I think, again, having students be able to function in areas of interest to them. I think there's just nothing quite as exciting as wanting to find out something and being able to find it out. And also, again, the notion of how you learn. There are some students that will learn with technology when they can interact with the internet or work with a computer that simply will not from a book. There are other students who, if they can hear it and follow, will get it better than if they don't have that support. But I think for most students, making that connection between things that they really want to know about or books that their peers like, things that are just fun to read, and having dialogue with peers. There's something just very satisfying for a child in being able to have a conversation and share and realize that they've contributed to that. So I think really on the whole I'd agree with what Louise is saying there: choice, interest, attention to mode of learning. And one of the things that certainly we know is that students are not motivated to read books that they can't read. So it comes back again to that notion of having books that are at the right readability level for a student as well as topics of interest.
Louise, go ahead, Mike.
Chime in. The one thing that you see in really effective schools is the students are having success at tasks that are challenging and interesting to them. Really good teachers are just masterful at figuring out what's just a little bit beyond this kid, okay? That this kid can get with some effort, and if they can get it with the strategies and competencies that we can deliver to them. And I have the privilege of a lifetime has been able to spend so much time in really excellent classrooms. And that vision of creating success, if you aren't seeing success in your students, you need to rethink, how can I improve my teaching so every one of these kids is succeeding? And here's the real trick. And I'll never forget, I just saw my friend Barb Skinner in Okemos yesterday. She's a master at this. They'll have a writing assignment, and all the kids are jazzed about reading maybe Julia the Wolf's or something. And everyone will be writing in response to it. And some kids will only be able to write 3 or 4 lines, and some kids will be able to write 4 or 5 pages. And Barb strokes every one of them for the success that they've had and the growth they're showing. And you know what? You watch the kids in a classroom like that, and they go from writing 2 or 3 lines in October to writing 3 or 4 pages at the end of the year.
That is a teacher who knows what she's doing. I think one of the questions on the lips of lots of our viewers is, what do you do for a child who continues to struggle after all this?
I think you simply continue to work. I mean, I think what Mike said earlier about the fact that students come to us very differently. They do come with intellectual handicaps. They come with huge challenges in learning language. I talked with an elderly teacher who had retired a number of years ago in Idaho last year, and I was talking to her about the concept of differentiation, and she said, you know, when I first started reading, they taught me how to teach reading, and I worked at it very hard, and some kids didn't get it, so I developed a second way, and then more kids got it. And after she took me through the whole progression, she finally ended up by saying, as well as I recall, by the time I stopped teaching, I was up to 9 ways of teaching reading, but they were all learning it.
Well, let me follow up on that then. 9 ways of teaching. What do you recommend for a teacher who has a very large classroom and very few resources?
I think you do the best you can do. I think, for example, you can sometimes make better adoption decisions in your district by, as Mike suggested, finding resources that give you more flexibility rather than resources that hamper your flexibility. I think you can sometimes ask community members to contribute a range of books and magazines. I did that in my own classes and actually was almost overrun with possibilities. I think you have to teach the routines more carefully if you have lots of students. And I think exactly like in a large family, parents learn that they have to ask the children to participate in making the family work. The larger the classroom, the more the students have to be collaborators with the teacher in making it work. We can do most of what we need to do in classes that are too large. We can do it with fewer resources if we'll be innovative in the way we use those things. It's too bad that that is the case, but I think we also always have to say to ourselves, life may not be perfect this year, but it's this child's only 3rd grade year. It's the only chance he'll ever have to develop these skills and competencies, and I think we just have to be innovative and use the materials, the resources, the flexibility that we can.
Mike, I want to come back to you on something, but first let me ask Louise a question about these problematic classrooms where you don't have very many resources, you have a large classroom. I want to go back to the issue of special ed students and accommodations. How do you reach children with all those different accommodations in one classroom?
Well, there are certainly accommodations that can be very appropriate for kids with special needs. For children with serious reading difficulties, a good example of that kind of legitimate accommodation is extra time. Often the students can understand the material and do the work, but they need more time because they're slower readers. One of the concerns I have about accommodations, especially this is more with older kids, not so much at the primary level, is that if accommodations are not coupled with good and aggressive remediation, you can accommodate the child right out of learning how to read. So your goal in the extended time example, your goal really should be to try to make the student a fluent reader so that ultimately they can read as other people do. And that may or may not be feasible for every single student, but that it should be a goal. And so I think we have to be careful about accommodations if they're not coupled with good remediation.
Yeah, I think the sort of a point there is a difference between accommodations and enabling. And you don't want to enable a student to relax or to become slack or to stay where they are.
Right.
You want to accommodate always with the notion of a higher ceiling, that sense of reaching.
Exactly, and there is a judgment there,
Exactly.
you know, similar to the thing of trying to find work that is just challenging enough for this student, but not that's so challenging that they can't be successful. And it's sort of the same issue with special needs kids in making these decisions.
Okay. And one of the things, even in the most under-resourced school, the most important resource is you, the teacher. And I'll give you a great example. I was talking to some people in a reading first school. They'd adopted a reading program I've helped develop. And they said, well, what do we do? You know what you can do? One of the things you can do is you can take that manual and you can learn everything you possibly can about reading from spending time with it and spending time with the internet. I give this advice quite a bit, and I often have teachers coming back and saying, my gosh, when I dove in there, I mean, this is like an advanced graduate course, okay? And I got so many ideas about how I could deal with particular problems I'm getting. So whatever resources you've got, you can spend more time with them. You can go at them with the headset. I'm going to figure out how these can work with my kids. These days with the internet, I mean, one of the resolutions I've made in my life is every night before I go to bed, I'm going to spend a half hour with that internet, and I'm going to get smarter about something that matters to me. Well, you can do that with respect to reading and differentiated instruction just as easily as you can with respect to any other topic. That net is loaded with quality resources. It's also loaded with junk. One of the things that happens, though, is as soon as you start getting better at this, you start to be able to pick out the wheat from the chaff.
And then you know. I'm going to throw this out to all of you. One of the supports some schools have is paraprofessionals and parent volunteers. How can they be involved in implementing the model we've described today?
I think they can be involved in just a myriad of ways. As Mike noted earlier, the better training the person has, the more specific kinds of help they can give. But even a person who comes in and just sits and reads with a child periodically and establishes that relationship and gives that kid a chance to hear a good adult reader read or read to an adult who can give them affirmation. It's a really important thing. Special ed and gifted ed and second language support people in a classroom can be so helpful, certainly as just another pair of hands to make those routines run, but they also become teachers of the teacher to help them see strategies that are in their realm of expertise, which interestingly will be important for a second language learner, but that same strategy can be really important sometimes for many other students in the class who don't have that particular need. So I think that range is hugely important.
Louise, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes also it takes fairly minimal training to learn how to do a certain set of things that could be enormously helpful. For example, one of the things I have concern about sometimes is the kind of feedback that children get when they're reading, which I think is very important to provide the right kind of feedback during children's oral reading. Well, you can train somebody in how to provide good feedback if in a fairly minimal amount of time, and then that person could play a role in working with children, listening to children read, and be extremely helpful.
I'm real high on this theme, and I'm going to give even a little different spin on it. I think communities are filled with funds of competence out there who will come into schools. A school we did work with last year, Bennett Woods, it was just thrilling to watch. You had parents in the community who would come in. They, for various reasons, they decided to stay home, raise their kid, but during the school day, their kids are at school. They come in there and they tutor kids in math, in reading. When you get a good one, work hard with that person to get them as involved as possible. Up in Manistee, Michigan, I'm watching this wonderful program where they have foster grandmothers in classrooms. Okay, and some of these foster grandmothers are terrific, and they've been out there at this 6 or 7 years. We need to work with the churches, we need to work with community groups, we need to identify those funds of competence and get them to realize there is an important role in improving the lives of children and the future of the country for them by coming in there and dedicating themselves to providing the kind of tutoring that they can provide.
Lots of roles for everybody. Thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, many of our friends from the education community are here with us in the studio, and they also have questions for our panelists. Dr. Tomlinson will answer the first question, and each of you can follow up with a short response. And I'd like to go to our first questioner.
Hello, I'm interested in the panelists' thoughts on the role of technology in differentiated instruction. What works?
Technology is an interesting arena because it does open up so many possibilities. We can find material at different readability levels. We can tap into interest. It does have to do with mode of learning. Some students respond better that way. I think two cautions for me would be that to plug a child into a computer and assume the computer is going to become the teacher is not appropriate. It needs to be something that a teacher carefully monitors and continually stays with and watches that particular student. One of the things that we know that, from the study of integration of technology into schools is that the best integration of technology is always in service of the student's thinking, of the understanding of ideas, of really helping that student have a broader reach and a broader competency in the world, not just simply checking off little worksheet kinds of things on the screen. So I think that rich use of technology can be very important in addressing readiness level, interest, second language, mode of learning, but it needs to be under the very careful watch of a teacher who understands that it's just one of a number of tools in the classroom that has certain ways of appropriate use as opposed to sort of insipid use.
Mike, a brief answer.
The brief answer for me is that every person in the country, every child in the country, has to get facile at dealing with technological environments. And the biggie right now for our time is the internet. This is highly motivating for kids, but it's also a set of skills they need to learn how to navigate. Now, what's in the internet, there is some terrific high quality stuff. So one of my favorite sites is the National Geographic site on Lewis and Clark. And every third and fourth grade class in the country is studying Lewis and Clark. You can go to that site and have a really high quality set of experiences that will expand kids' social studies understanding and their reading competence, okay? As a nation, we need to get very attentive to figuring out which of these sites are just great, and we need to work very hard at getting teachers to realize that to navigate kids into those can do a lot of positive good.
Thank you. I'm going to throw the next question to you, Louise,
Sure.
and we'll go to our second questioner.
The goals of the No Child Left Behind law require addressing the needs of every student to meet state standards for successful reading. Do you believe actual implementation of the law, particularly as it's shaped by the Reading First Act, encourages differentiated instruction?
Well, I think implementation can always vary, so implementations can always be faulty. The basic idea of the law in terms of these 5 main components of reading, you know, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, are an excellent basis for beginning to differentiate instruction in terms of abilities, because we know that those are key abilities for learning how to read, and if children have weaknesses in those areas, those are weaknesses that are important to address. But there are certainly other ways to differentiate instruction that are also important. Some of those have been touched upon today: students' motivation, students' interests, the background knowledge that they bring to the classroom, characteristics like that. So I think it's important to consider those things as well.
Carol, would you like to add something to that?
I think just a short thought, and that is there's a difference between standards that you want students to achieve and standardization. And the more it becomes a national goal for us to ensure that students all reach at least a certain level of competency, the irony is the more we can't standardize what we do. To help all students succeed at a level of competency is going to take many different routes, time periods, all kind of flexibility, and I think it's critical that we not confuse standards and standardization, because we simply can't achieve what we're trying to by ignoring student differences.
Mike.
Okay, as many of you in the audience know, I am on the public record that Reading First could be a lot better. And what's happened in this first generation, I think this was a noble effort. And I think there's great positives, but it turns out there's been a lot of feedback come in about how this could be improved. As we rethink the Elementary and Secondary Act and rethink Reading First, it is very important that we have leadership in place that will, in fact, take that feedback and constructively come up with a much better law that will work much better with every kid and allow schools to do a much better job with the resources they receive. Now, if you want to see my further comments on this, there'll be something in Ed Week in a couple weeks, and you can go to the Michigan State Literacy Achievement Research Center website, and I have a very long document on there about some of the improvements I think are possible based on the feedback that's come in.
Thank you, Mike. Next question.
I've been an educator for a number of years, and I've seen a variety of approaches that have dealt with differentiated reading instruction. And yet when I go to schools, I see very little differentiated instruction. So my question is, what can be done within the school structure in the classroom to enable teachers to implement differentiated reading instruction?
Who wants to take a stab at that? Carol.
Start. You know, I think we have to believe that as teachers, we're learners as well, and one of our difficulties has been that we've not been very good teachers of teachers. I think we're very famous for the one-shot staff development, or we do differentiation for a year and then we go away. In schools where we see this working, there's a sustained focus by an involved leader who understands the concept and the difficulty, who makes sure that teachers have models of what they're looking at, who's constantly in classrooms to encourage teachers to share with one another, to work with one another to make this happen. In the places where we see it happen on a broad scale rather than just with the occasional wonderful teacher, it's that sort of sustained leadership effort. And I think a critical part of that we've not gotten is that we have to differentiate for our teachers as well. Our research suggests to us that 4 common barriers to differentiation are, if I'll transfer this to reading, lack of clarity of what the real reading goals would be, lack of reflection on individual students, lack of a repertoire of instructional strategies that enable teachers to reach out in multiple ways, and real fear of managing a differentiated classroom. Trick is, not all teachers have the same issues. And so what we really need to be doing is figuring out what it is with each teacher that would help them succeed in much the same way we do with students.
That was a great answer, and we have another question that was a very good answer.
Hi. Interested in your thoughts as to whether you feel that teachers who would be attempting to use differentiated instruction would likely face skepticism from parents as you attempt to meet the needs of all the students in your classroom.
Louise?
Well, that's sort of an interesting question. That's not something that really would have occurred to me before. I don't think so if parents perceive that the teacher is setting high goals for the student and providing instruction that's appropriate for them. One of the things you see sometimes in special education, because that's my specialty, kids who really struggle, is that the children kind of go along at the same level year after year, don't really progress, so they may be getting something different from the other children, but the real problem is the lack of progress. So I think that if the instruction is effective, most parents are going to be happy with that.
We have another question from our audience.
How can students in a differentiated classroom work together in cooperative teams, say, for example, on a reading activity?
Mike?
Oh, it turns out in really effective classrooms, students are working cooperatively all the time. But the real trick here in the cooperative situation is that everybody has to be on task and has to be accountable. And that comes about because the teacher is there monitoring like crazy. Is this a healthy situation, or is this kid being allowed to be a wallflower in this group? If they're being a wallflower in this group tomorrow, they're going to be a different group if you're an effective teacher. I would just like to pick up on that last question just a little bit. No matter what you do as a teacher, there'll be skepticism from parents. So you need to educate them, okay? My greater concern is that there's a lot of skepticism among policymakers and educational leadership with respect to the idea of differentiated instruction. We've got to get in the heads of the next generation of educators that differentiated instruction is a great thing. The real challenge is you're not going to be able to do that after you finish Teachers College. You're just at the start. So we also have to get the headset, you know what? You've got to get better at this every year that you're working, and you can do that by learning more about instruction, learning more about kids. That becoming a professional educator is a 5 to 10 year venture.
And that sums up a lot of what we learned today. It's a long, long process. Thank you, everyone. Please let us know what you thought about this program. Visit readingrockets.org to take our survey. And please join us for the next Reading Rockets teleconference on March 22nd. From babbling to books about building pre-reading skills. You can find more information on our website, readingrockets.org. Thank you for joining us. Take care, and thank you all.
series Launching Young Readers or documentary A Tale of Two Schools, visit us at www.readingrockets.org or call 800-757-6845. The Reading Rockets teleconference series is a production of WETA in cooperation with the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. Funding for this teleconference is provided by the United States Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs.